Ir šiandienos tema paliečia vieną aktualiausių pandemijos IT temų, tai saugų prisijungimą per nuotolį. Tikrų naudotojų autentifikavimą, skirtingų naudotojų darbą su bendro naudojimo įrenginiais, nedarant to sudėtinga ir naudotojai nepatogia patirtimi. Šiandienos pranešėjai Caroline Centro, mūsų partnerio Yubico kanalo vystymo vadovės Skandinavijos, Baltijos ir Beneliukso šalims, pristatys tai, ką naudoja didžiausia pasaulio IT žaidėjai saugiam naudotojų autorizavimui. Ir, aišku, papasakos praktinius naudojimo aspektus. Noriu taip pat informuoti, kad kaip ir anksčiau, klausimus kviečiame rašyti viso pristatymo metu čia skiltyje, jos atsakysime pristatymo pabaigoje. Caroline, I have made a brief introduction, and now you can take over.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. I'm going to take you through a presentation about Yubico and YubiKeys today and what it's used for and how it can help you secure authentication. My name is Caroline Santoro. I'm the channel manager for Nordics and the Baltics at Yubico. So first and foremost, looking at the company Yubico, that might be new to some of you. Today, we secure more than 4,000 businesses, more than 10 million users across 160 different countries. This is a Swedish company originally, and our main headquarters are in Stockholm, but also in Palo Alto. YubiKeys works to secure your existing infrastructure, and it has more than 700 applications that it works together with. We've been around for about 13 years and we're growing consistently. 5 years ago, we were 25 people. A year ago, we were about 150, and now we are approaching 300. So this is very much a fast growing company. Okay, so what is YubiKeys? Let's start with that. So YubiKeys are security keys that can be used to secure pretty much your entire infrastructure. A few things is important to know here. First and foremost, there's a YubiKey that works with all devices, no matter which tablet, which PC, laptop, or mobile phone you're using, there is a YubiKey that works with that. So starting from the left, the 4 first keys here, they're all designed to stay on your keychain. So whenever you have several devices that you want to authenticate against, like a tablet and a mobile phone, or maybe a laptop and a mobile phone, these often are the keys that we recommend, as you can move them around, keeping them on your keychain. The 2 last keys, the tiny keys, are our nano keys, and they are designed to stay in your computer at all times, and then you never have to think about bringing it along, right? Another thing that is important to know about YubiKeys is that they are incredibly durable. So they do not have any batteries, and they are created by an incredibly robust material. So we meet people that have been using their YubiKeys almost for 10 years, and it's still working. A lot of new protocols and functionality has been added throughout the years. But when you bought a YubiKey, you can be sure that it will last you for a really long time. The latest key that we released is a YubiKey 5C NFC. This is a very much all-round key, because with the USB-C, it works together with pretty much all new laptops, all new Android phones, but also with new PCs, and it also works together with iPhones, as they have opened up the NFC capabilities. So this is a key that very often can be used for the entire organization if you don't want to make a decision of splitting up keys and having different types of keys for different employees. So we are lucky enough to be trusted by some of the world's leading enterprises and governments. We secure 9 out of 10 out of the big tech companies in the US, such as Google and Facebook. But then we are also working with and have public reference cases with UK government, US state government, with CERN, with GitHub, and several other companies as well. A lot of these companies have also created support for YubiKey, so you can use it with their own services. And I would recommend you to Google Works with YubiKey, and then you will get into a page where you can see the list of all of the verified applications that we work together with. And in this way, it's going to be easier to identify which parts of your infrastructure are you able to use together with YubiKeys in a seamless way. Also worth to mention is that we work with companies of all sizes. YubiKeys is not necessarily a pure enterprise solution. We have customers that range from several hundred thousands of employees to only a few employees, and it's also well used by individuals. I'm sure some of you on this call might have tried a YubiKey maybe for your personal Gmail account, your Facebook account, or similar as well. So this is, no matter how big or small you are as a company, YubiKeys works very well for those for companies of all sizes. So the issue that we're working with is stolen credentials. This is a massive issue that we're all faced with. 1 out of 3 companies will experience a data breach within the next 2 years, but more than 80% of all of the hacking related breaches, they're related to stolen credentials. So if you can make sure that your credentials can't be stolen, and that you can find a solution that puts a full stop to all account takeovers, you've taken away a massive part of the threat against your organization. And it's well known that strong two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is the absolutely most effective protection for account takeovers. So if you compare YubiKeys to other two-factor and MFA solutions and multi-factor authentication solutions, you can see it in 3 different levels. The first level is only using the password and username. We know that the majority is still doing this. You might have started working with basic two-factor authentication, and then you have strong two-factor authentication as this third and final layer for this. Username and password is easy, right? It's where we get started. It's deployed everywhere. It is very common target for credential phishing. Basic 2FA. Worth to mention here is that no matter what 2FA or MFA solution you are choosing, it is much better than not having a 2FA or MFA solution. To be able to stand the chance against cyber criminals in terms of account takeovers, you need a second layer of protection more than passwords and usernames. So whatever you choose, it is much better than not having anything. And then you have these 2 layers of MFA and 2FA. The basic 2FA is SMS codes, as you might have used, an extra email, mobile, getting a phone call, having an OTP applications where you get the codes. So in general, all of these 2FA solutions that are software based, right? And as long as you can communicate with the software, the cyber criminal can also be able to jump onto that connection and take advantage of the vulnerabilities that it comes with that. Again, this put a stop for some of the attacks, but the second that a cyber criminal has decided to go for your organization, there are ways past software-based authentication. Secure authentication is purpose-built for security. Special is that you don't need a network connection nor stored data or client software for it to be required. This is highly phishing resistant. And this is where the YubiKey come in, right? So looking at how these multi-factor authentication alternatives secure your accounts. This is big research done by Google in 2019, where they took 350,000 users and real-world hijacking attempts. And then they looked at what are the MFA alternatives that stop account takeovers. And as you can see, phone numbers and SMS code, they still let pass 50 to 24% of the attacks. They do stop quite a few of them, but it's also very much possible to pass it, right? Same goes with secondary email, and same goes with on-device prompts. So these OTP push apps where you have an authenticator application in your phone that gives you a code where the secret's stored within your phone. YubiKeys, on the other hand, they had 0 successful account takeovers. So they stopped 100% of all of the attacks. And this is what is important to understand about YubiKeys as well, that this is a bulletproof MFA solution. It stops all of the account takeovers. Google themselves have been using YubiKeys for many years. And since they started using YubiKeys and rolled out YubiKeys both as an authentication method, but also as a backup solution, there has been 0 successful phishing accounts against Google and 0 successful account takeovers. So this is a proven MFA solution. When it comes to the use of YubiKeys, because historically you've had to choose between high security or ease of use. And very often companies has gone for ease of use. And that's why we see so many breaches as we see today, right? When you use a YubiKey, you very simply insert the YubiKey, you touch it, show that there's a human being sitting here, and then you're logged in. So if you compare this to receiving a text message, opening your phone, and then you have to make sure, of course, you have battery and service, type over the text message into where you want to log in. This is a much simpler alternative to just insert a key, tap it, and you're in. So the company is called Ubico, and the product is called YubiKey, and that comes from the word ubiquitous, which means that it should work with everything at all times. So the thought with the YubiKey is that you should have one key to secure your entire infrastructure. So all of the different applications you have should be able to be supported by YubiKeys. To help on that path, it's today more than 700 applications that work pretty much out of the box together with YubiKeys. The Works with YubiKeys page is the list of the verified integrations, but then there's a row of other alternatives as well to use the keys with. The keys are produced in Sweden or in the US. So everything that is sold in EMEA is produced in Sweden. And this is to be sure that we have complete control over our entire supply chain. The keys, as I mentioned, are really robust. They're water resistant, crush resistant. They don't have any batteries. We know of companies, or we know of people that have had their YubiKeys eaten by dogs, and it still worked afterwards. I've heard about YubiKeys that have been dropped in the snow, found after 6 months, and still work at the end of it. So when you have a YubiKey, it will work for a long time. So the reason on why you can use YubiKeys for so big part of your infrastructure is because the YubiKey provides multi-protocol support. which means that we have a lot of different protocols that can be used for different parts of your infrastructure. We come from the oath part with TOTP and HOTP. So the first YubiKeys produced were based on this protocol. You can use this together with Ubico Authenticator, which is an authenticator app, but it differs in the way that you have the secrets stored on the YubiKey. And we use this in some shared device scenarios. For instance, if you can put the Ubico Authenticator app on a PC that is used by different employees. And when employee number 1 inserts their YubiKey to the PC, they get their set of codes because the secrets is stored inside of the YubiKey. When employee number 2 comes thereafter and inserts their YubiKey, they will get their codes that is stored within their YubiKey, right? So looking at the Fido protocols, Fido stands for Fast Identity Online and is today in alliance with more than 250 organizations. Fido U2F is the first version of the Fido protocols and the Fido standards, and U2F stands for Universal Second Factor. Google and Yubico are predominantly the drivers behind Fido U2F. And it is the protocol that you're using for most web-based applications where you have username, password, and then you have a strong multi-factor on top of it, which is the YubiKey. Fido 2 is the future-proof protocol. It is invented in collaboration with several organizations, and Microsoft has been a driving party for this. So Fido 2, using this, you don't need any passwords or username. This is based on asymmetric cryptography. So you use public key cryptography, where you use public-private key to log in, instead of using username and passwords. So Fido 2 is the enabler of going passwordless with Microsoft, for instance. This is very much adaptable for those that have done a cloud journey, that they have their AD, as Azure, but a lot of companies still have their AD on-prem, right? And for those that are that have their AD on-prem or are using more legacy systems, you can also use YubiKeys as a smart card. And depending on how your infrastructure look like, you don't necessarily have had to work with smart card previously to have it work as well. And in many cases, I know a lot of the people in here are Microsoft users. They're going to be able to combine that with Microsoft's offering to be able to set it up as a smart card. And the good thing here is that you never have to choose which protocol to use, right? So you can use a combination of it. You might want to use Oath for some applications. Then you might want to do Fido U2F for a IAM or a single sign-on, smart card for certain applications, and Fido 2 for those of your users that are in Azure or in a hybrid environment. So here you can create your combination that works for your company. So looking specifically at the Fido protocols and what makes them so incredibly secure. First and foremost, it's hardware based on strong cryptography that we've already covered. In the YubiKey, you're not, as with many other security schemes, you're not dependent on a centralized server where the credentials are stored that can ultimately be hacked. All of the secrets is stored on a secure element inside of the YubiKey. Yubico and Google are the inventors behind a concept called origin-bound keys. And this is the concept of origin-bound keys is also what puts a stop to a lot of the phishing attacks. It very simply means that the YubiKey, your personal YubiKey, is linked to the original, it's bound to the original URL. So say, for instance, that you're using Google as a single sign-on, as from many consumer applications, you're able to log in with Google, right? And use that as a single sign-on. A normal phishing attack is that you would get a fake site that says login with Google with the aim to get your credentials, right? The YubiKey wouldn't recognize these pages where you would have a 0 instead of an O in Google, for instance, because it is bound to the original URL. And this is what stops a lot of those very normal phishing attacks. User presence. To log in with the YubiKey, you need to physically touch the YubiKey. And this ensures that it puts a full stop for remote hackers, right? You need to have your physical YubiKey to be able to log in towards your applications. And the big threat is not someone robbing you for your YubiKey and logging in. The big threat is these remote hacks that is happening from the other side of the world. You can have a lot of applications, but you don't have any shared secret between those applications, which means you can take one YubiKey and use it for your Office 365, for your bank, for your private Facebook account, your Dropbox, and maybe even your Twitter account. And you can use the same YubiKey, but there's no shared secrets in between of these different services and applications, which means that we are contributing to an increased level of security, but also protecting privacy at the same time. When it comes to backup, so I'm sure that some of you in here will ask the question, what happens when I lose my YubiKey? And the response to that is that there's a lot of different ways to doing it, and that depends on your level of security. But another normal hack is that you have hackers that attack weak recovery systems and backup alternatives. YubiKeys are secure enough, simple enough, and affordable enough to use both as your method of authentication, but also as your method of backing up. So at Google, for instance, everyone has one YubiKey that is inserted to your laptop at all times, and then you also have a YubiKey that they put together with their badge, their access badge. And in that sense, if you lose your YubiKey or something like that, you are able to you're able to log in without even have to contacting the IT department immediately. You can revoke access from your YubiKey that you've lost or forgotten, and then you use your second YubiKey, and you do the same process to set up a new key as well. And this depends on the policies in terms of how you're setting up the keys. I saw there's a question coming in about central key management solutions, and this depends. So Ubico is just the key, but it works together with all of these applications. So you might be using if you're using smart cards, you might have a CMS that you're using. If you have an identity access management, such as Okta, Duo, Ping, you might be using that. You can do a lot of the management in Microsoft's tools as well. So this really, really depends. And this is where we are very much dependent on our good partners such as Blue Bridge to help navigate in those scenarios as well, and advise on management and how to do that in a way that works the best for your organization. Ultimately, it's also native browser and OS support for the YubiKeys. And this means that you can have it work without the need of a lot of different extra software. So if you have a YubiKey, if you buy a YubiKey for your personal use, try setting it up at accounts for Google or for your Twitter or for your Facebook, and you'll see that it works natively. So looking at some of those things that YubiKeys are used for, this is kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time, because YubiKeys can be used for so much, and that gives the organizations that use YubiKeys a lot of flexibility. But sometimes it can be hard to put it in order and see exactly what it can be used for and all of the use cases that it can be used for. First and foremost, and where a lot of people start, is privileged accounts. So anyone who works within IT, you have your C-level staff, anyone who has access to extra sensitive data, you need to make sure that these individuals have the highest level of security. And this is where YubiKeys very often are introduced as the first step. And very often, both as a authentication method, but also as a backup solution for this specific user group. It's also very much used in mobile restricted environments. So any case where you might not have service, or more common that not all employees have mobile phones provided by their employer, and they don't want to connect their private being with their professional being, right? This is a really good alternative because the YubiKeys doesn't need service. They don't need any batteries or anything like that to work. Mobile restricted environment is a well-used scenario. And it's, of course, much, much cheaper to get a YubiKey for each employee in comparison to get a phone for each employee. Shared workstation is fairly related. So maybe you have a kiosk, you might have a POS system in retail, you might have a hospital where you have nurses and doctors switching between different units and devices to log into. All of these scenarios where you are very often dependent on quick, easy, and more than anything, reliable authentication that always works. YubiKeys is a good solution for this. You can also use it, of course, to secure your remote workforce. I'm sure that many of you, as myself, sitting at the home office on unsecure networks, and that's also why we see a massive increase of breaches, of cyber attacks in general towards organizations of all sizes and types. And in these times, it is, of course, very important to make sure that all of your employees are as secure as possible. Looking at then some of the applications and services that is protected. The first part is web applications. And here again is where you choose between the different protocols, right? You can use different protocols for different applications and services. For web applications, you have everything from Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft 365, Amazon, GitHub, maybe you have a CRM system like Salesforce. All of these web-based applications very often can be used together with YubiKeys. You can also use it to secure your computer login. This is built into Microsoft Smart Card logging and passwordless. You can also use it to secure your VPN, very much related to securing the remote workforce, right? To make sure that your VPN connection has a really strong multi-factor authentication on top of it. And this can be really useful for legacy systems such as Radius. Then you have IAM and single sign-on. When you have one place that gives you access to the rest of the organization's tools and applications, it is, of course, important to have the highest level of security for that. This can be used together with OpenID Connect and SAML. And then ultimately, pretty much anything you can authenticate against, right? So wherever you put a username and password, start thinking, what can I do to put an extra layer of security on top of this? We are referring a lot to Google because they have a lot of data and it's one of our oldest customers. Our founders moved to San Francisco to be closer to Google as they were our first customer. And their issue was that they had an issue with account takeovers and phishing attacks, despite using their mobile authenticator app, their Google Authenticator. The solution was that it gave they made it obligatory and mandatory to use YubiKeys for all employees, and they also made it possible and optional for all end users to use YubiKeys. They have been doing this for years, and the result is published in a research report by Google that shows the results of introducing these keys. And the result has been, first of all, 0 successful account takeovers. It's also been 4 times faster to log in, since you don't need the application, typing in the numbers, etc. And a surprising number for everyone has been that it's been a 92% support reduction, because when you're using YubiKeys and you have these incredibly strong multi-factor layer, you are not dependent on having to change passwords every 30th day with uppercase, lowercase, and special characters, and you can have a strong password. And this drastically reduced the need for support from the IT department, and it drastically reduced the number of account lockouts. So if you as an organization starts tracking the resources put behind account lockouts, forgotten passwords, etc., it's going to be fairly easy to calculate the cost of YubiKeys into that and to look at the cost saving. And then it's 0 failure rates. And this is important, that it always, always, always works. And for some environments, it's more critical than for other environments, but having a reliable solution is essential for many organizations. So I'm going to stop at this to give you a moment to look over the use cases now that you have been participating in the presentation, to see if any of these are relevant for yourself. And I'm going to keep this page up as we will see if there's any questions that are coming in as well.
Okay, thank you for presentations, and I see as some people wrote some questions, so I will read it to you. Central key management solution for organizations. So you talked about a little bit about this. As I understand, you can use Microsoft tools to manage second-factor authentication. And also the second part, new users onboarding for the organization. This is the same, as I understand. Could you give an example, maybe with Microsoft tools? Somehow you add those YubiKeys to the system, or what is the situation?
Yes. So this again depends if you are if you're on-prem or if you're in Azure. To activate the keys with Azure is literally pretty much a 3-step process. This is quite straightforward to try and to test the keys, and then it obviously differs a lot in terms of how many users you want to roll out. But for those that are interested, and I see that it's a few questions coming in regarding this topic, I'll leave my email in here, and then I can share some resources that can point to some of those tools that are most often used for certain scenarios as well, so that everyone can get some insights on that.
Okay, then as I understand, YubiKey and PC works with Android. What about iOS?
It works with iOS as well.
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
very recently updated, so to say. I think when it comes to updates, Apple has a tendency of not being the first one to make any releases. So we are very much happy that it works with iOS at the moment as well. I saw one chat question coming in here as well.
Yes. So this is maybe more difficult one, or more?
No, that's fine. I can read it. So could you please explain how YubiKey prevents the attacker from gaining access to the system during social engineering attacks when the attacker already has stolen username and passwords, and for the second factor calls the user and convinces them to insert the YubiKey and touch it? So I would say that if you are a hacker that are able to call the user and convince them to touch their YubiKey, then of course there is a way past it, right? But then you need to convince the user to do that. So the important part here is that you need to make sure that you educate your employees as well, to not respond to these kind of calls. And Yeah, I think that's the only thing I could say. When you are enabling and rolling out YubiKeys, for instance, make sure that people know that this should only be touched when you are choosing to logging in, or that you're in a secure environment to logging into YubiKeys, because yeah, this shouldn't happen.
Mm-hmm. So as I see, no more questions for now. So then, thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting, and yeah, we will see you maybe later.
Most definitely. Thank you very much for having me. And if anyone has more questions afterwards or prefer typing those questions, please reach out to us, and we're more than happy to respond to those.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I will switch to Lithuania now.
Thank you
again. So, nepamirškite taip pat užsiregistruoti į kitus mūsų webinarus.